This is the UK Financial Intelligence Unit podcast.
Hello and welcome to another UK Financial Intelligence Unit podcast. My name is David Maguire and I'm a Senior Officer in the UKFIU. In this edition we're looking at Vulnerable Person Suspicious Activity Reports, or SARs. While fulfilling anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing obligations, SAR reporters sometimes identify individuals who are being exploited or who are potential victims of fraud. And the UKFIU has procedures in place to identify SARs containing information on various types of fraud that target vulnerable members of society. These SARs are identified daily by the UKFIU and are fast-tracked to police forces who will, in many cases, arrange visits by local officers to offer advice to prevent fraud or further losses. In this podcast we'll be hearing from the reporter side who submit the SARs, from the UKFIU who receive them and identify the potentially vulnerable individuals, and from law enforcement who receive the fast-track SARs and act on them. I'll be speaking with Denise Napper, a manager in the UKFIU, Kate Mills, a financial investigator with Thames Valley Police, and Antonia Bennett, a nominated officer with Nationwide. As with all our podcasts, no active or sensitive operational work is discussed and panellists' opinions are independently theirs. Denise, can you explain what the process is in your team regarding identifying and disseminating these SARs?
We have responsibility for handling incoming SARs on a daily basis for UK law enforcement agencies, including operational and intelligence-driven teams in the NCA, and also on an international basis where necessary, relating to any immediate action that's required.
So, Denise, what exactly is fast-tracking?
All of the SARs are extracted and reviewed and actioned on the same day of receipt, and where we identify the need to disseminate immediately to end users, we do that and take the necessary action before they're made available on the external SARs portals for the financially accredited end users that we engage with. So we have a number of options available to us. We can retain those SARs that we receive within the UKFIU and can block them from being made available to end users. We refer to that as the suppression of sensitive SARs, but we will then still action those to make sure the right people see that material. We can pass it to an intelligence team to develop further intelligence packages and to assist with any ongoing cases that we're aware of internally. We can pass to an NCA or a police investigation team to assist them, and we can fast track also for the instigation of new inquiries or investigations.
And why is fast-tracking so important?
The most important thing about fast tracking is that rather than wait the standard 7 days for a SAR to automatically be allocated to the relevant police force, we will exploit it within time critical windows, so we can send that SAR out within 24 hours of having received it. We've got different methods for being able to do that. And I'd really like to reiterate that not all SARs identified as potentially concerning for a vulnerable person, for example, will be fast-tracked. We do have processes in place to decide what is absolutely essential for law enforcement to receive, and we have really good relationships with the recipients that it is the case. If they receive a fast-track SAR from us, they know that they need to take immediate action with it. For the SARs that we decide not to fast-track, we allow our IT systems to operate the distributed model, and the SARs will be sent to the geographically relevant police force for the postcode of the subject of the SAR that we've received.
Denise, what kind of criminality are you finding in relation to vulnerable persons?
So SAR Inquiries and Action Team are finding that the effect of frauds and scams on vulnerable individuals is still very evident in the increasing number of SARs that we receive. This crime has a considerable and significant impact on individuals' health, in addition to, in many cases, sadly, significant financial loss. Vulnerable people can and are often the main target for scammers, although they can become a victim to a fraud, actually regardless of age, gender, or their financial situation. For the elderly and disabled individuals, a fraud can have a devastating effect on their emotions and can lead to them actually being targeted again by a range of further fraud attempts, often being added to what we've been advised is referred to as a suckers list, where fraudsters pass on the details of people that they've been able to successfully exploit for other crime groups to try and extract more financial gain from the individuals. And the SARs we analyse each day contain intelligence on a variety of different frauds and situations where people are being financially exploited. The exploitation could be at the hands of a family member, those close to them in positions of trust, a carer, a friend that has been put in place to protect them. Powers of attorney, for example, are there in place intentionally with the aim of exploiting and extracting money from the victims. And some situations, sadly, we've been notified have also included instances of physical abuse. We see the SARs relating to romance frauds, along with pressure and coercion to send money overseas. And we find that this particular fraud is really popular when targeting, again, elderly people or people that are lonely. They live quite isolated lives and believe genuinely that the company and the attention they're receiving is legitimate.
And it's also worth mentioning to listeners that a number of these scams can start with less noticeable amounts before escalating to the victims taking out loans and getting into considerable debt, with the individual often not accepting that they have become a victim. Kate, I know that Thames Valley Police, like a number of police forces, are proactive in protecting vulnerable members of society. With regards to vulnerable person SARs, what kind of measures do you put in place to safeguard members of the community to prevent fraud?
We hear about the potential victims of financial crime through a number of different ways, such as the victim themselves reporting it, through the SAR regime, or via the banking protocol. The banking protocol is instigated by the branch staff in the high street banks, and that comes into play if they're suspicious or concerned about a transaction that the customer in the branch is trying to make, such as withdrawing a large amount of cash or trying to transfer funds that don't fit in with their usual line of activity. Staff, if they become suspicious, will discreetly question their customer just to establish a bit more behind the reasoning for their request that day. And also, indeed, if somebody is making them attend the bank, are they being forced into making this transaction? If the staff are still concerned about their customer, they'll alert the branch manager and then just take them off to a quiet room where they can be questioned a bit further and been made to feel safe as well, because it may be that they're being forced to attend the bank. More information is then sought, such as, were they driven to the bank? Are they on the phone to somebody whilst they're trying to make the transaction? Or is somebody at another location waiting for them? Once that information is known and the risk associated is known, the bank, then through the banking protocol, will call the police on the 999 number because there potentially is a crime taking place. And they'll quote the banking protocol to the police operator, and then officers will get dispatched directly to the bank. Even if the customer refuses to stay in the bank, the call should still be made, and and we can meet the customer at their home address or wherever they may be. The bank can feel safe in making that call even if the customer isn't there, because it's all done under the Data Protection Act legislation for the prevention and detection of crime. So that's one good way of us hearing about potential victims. When officers attend to the home address or the bank and speak to the victim, if we do find that an offence has taken place, we'll ensure that they know that they're safe and it isn't their fault, and that we will do all we can to help them. We will take statements, we'll look for CCTV, and if the suspect is there or is waiting nearby, then we will arrest them on suspicion of criminal offences, and then seek to get the evidence from the bank and from the victim.
How do you protect the confidentiality aspect of the SARs regime in those instances when a local officer visits a potential vulnerable person? I'm assuming they won't mention that they've got that information via intelligence submitted via a SAR.
No, that's right. The standard that we want to stress to the reporters who put the SARs in, that the SAR information is not disclosed to the customer. We sanitize all the information and we ensure that the bank isn't mentioned. Obviously, if the person is in the bank, then they know that the bank staff have a concern, a genuine concern, because they will have spoken to them about that. And very often the banking protocol, it's welcomed because they could have been suffering as a victim for a very long time. So to have somebody recognise that within a bank or somewhere like that is very welcomed. But if it comes to us via the other channels of the SARs, then we want to reassure all the reporters that they are dealt with in a sensitive way, and any information that we disseminate is done so once it's sanitised.
If we can focus a little on the fast-tracking of SARs by the UKFIU, which Denise mentioned earlier, why are these so valuable to law enforcement?
Very, very often these fast-tracked SARs are the first indication that something is not quite right. Bank staff may notice an increase in cash being paid into the account, or cash withdrawn from the account, or just an increase in foreign payments coming in and out, or just third parties that are paying money in. And it just doesn't fit right with what's expected from the profile of that customer. As soon as we receive these fast-tracked SARs, we search our system and we see if they are known to us. And very often they're not. And also they're not all necessarily known to any other agencies. So they could have been suffering for a long time as a victim of this offence with nobody knowing. Like you mentioned earlier, sometimes there's a lot of embarrassment that goes with this. And they are really coerced into becoming a victim. It can be a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls before it's highlighted to us. So they may just not have any friends or family that they're speaking to about it. So it doesn't get told to us by any other channel other than the bank. And it's vital that we receive these, because the bank themselves can see the change in activity. They can see a spike in a certain month where all this activity has started. So it's great that we receive these. Then we can instigate a visit to them and offer that vital advice and support that's needed.
From a law enforcement perspective, is there anything that reporters could be doing that would help further with the analysis and identification of potentially vulnerable people?
We would just like to say, if you have any doubts or concerns about your customer, no matter what value is involved, the money isn't of concern to us. Our concern is that there are victims out there that we don't know about. So if any doubts or concerns, just report it, because that could be the trigger that's needed to get help and support to the ones who need it the most. We want to offer reassurance that we review and action all of these fast-tracked SARs, and a process is applied to each and every one, where we will make a decision as to do they get a visit, or do we get another agency involved. But each and every one is reviewed and actioned. So they're really, really important to us. Include as much information as you can about what has driven you to raise the SAR, such as what is that activity that concerns you and why. When did you notice a change in the activity? As we touched earlier, we sanitise all the information that we give to our frontline officers who will attend the addresses. So any information and intelligence they provide is totally protected. and only the necessary information is sanitised and given to those officers. So we don't put the reporter or the officer or the customer in a position that they're not happy with. So any information at all that they can put on there that is relevant, including where the money is going to and who it's come from. So not just that activity, but a little bit of background around it. But rest assured, we review all of them and action them all, and they are incredibly important to us.
Thanks, Kate. So, Antonia, from Nationwide's perspective, you must get increasing numbers of reports from across your organisation that lead to the identification of the potential abuse of vulnerable customers. How do you identify these?
So the numbers of vulnerable customers are definitely increasing, particularly in light of the challenges the pandemic has brought. There are various ways in which we might identify a vulnerable customer. So our branch and contact centre colleagues are our first line of defence when dealing with our members face to face. And naturally, they often deal with vulnerable customers, whether they be the victims of scams, financial abuse, or even modern slavery and human trafficking. We also have automated scam detection controls, and they alert our operational team in our fraud department, who would then investigate, liaise with the customer and our branch staff, and provide education and support in that way. It's possible that our customer-facing financial crime teams identify vulnerability also while investigating a fraud or AML case that wasn't originally opened as a vulnerable customer case, but whilst talking to that customer, it becomes apparent that they're vulnerable and require support. And we also have a dedicated specialist support team. They're there to provide support beyond that, which can be provided at the front line. So depending on the circumstances, referrals can be made to that team to provide a tailored approach for vulnerable members who need extra help to manage or understand their finances. And the team has close links with social services and the Office of Public Guardian to enable relevant safeguarding provisions to be made. And those colleagues are also encouraged to refer financial abuse cases to our financial crime team for investigation and potential onward referral. COVID has actually had a major impact on the workload of our SST team, the specialist support team. As I said, the pandemic has brought those challenges, particularly cases relating to physical and mental illness, domestic abuse and financial abuse. They've all increased significantly.
You must have some scenarios whereby some potential victims will plausibly justify suspect payments and may even be reluctant to consider or recognise that they are a victim. How do you deal with those situations?
Yeah, we do get those scenarios. They're probably the most challenging cases our teams have to deal with. The thought of someone losing their life savings or putting themselves at risk of severe unmanageable debt is heartbreaking. Each case is dealt with on an individual basis. Every one is very different, and it's so according to the scenario, it depends how our teams will deal with them. We do have cases where, despite multiple attempts to try to get our customers to see they're being scammed, the customer is insistent, and it's also not unusual for these customers to become very angry and sometimes verbally abusive. And our colleagues will do their absolute utmost to try and persuade them, but some of these people can't be persuaded. So if our colleagues feel they've done all they can in that instance and the customer insists on making the payment, that's as far as we can take it. But in many other cases, our branch and fraud colleagues are successful in getting members to realise what's happening. They're able to put additional measures in place to protect these vulnerable members, such as ensuring, placing blocks on accounts, taking time to educate the customer on, for example, why online banking may not be suitable for them and what other options they have. And our fraud team colleagues are also able to work with our branch colleagues to provide a service which is fit for the individual. And that's really important to us as a society.
Is there anything further you'd like to stress from the reporter perspective?
I suppose from a thinking about it from a SARs perspective, as my role is nominated officer at Nationwide, the most important thing for me is that we are, meeting our obligations of reporting suspicions. And from my, discussions with UKFIU and NCA colleagues previously, I'm well aware of that the focus remains on those vulnerable members of society, and I think we play a massive part in that. So we're very focused on continuing to provide education out to our colleagues in terms of what to look for in terms of vulnerability, and then what to do when they report that into us, and then what our operations team can do to ensure that quality reports go to the National Crime Agency in order for those to be, as quickly as possible investigated and safeguarding put in place. So for me, it's just it's just a real priority of ours to ensure that we're protecting vulnerable members given the situation we're in right now.
Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast. I think you'll agree that fast-track SARs are hugely important for law enforcement, particularly in real-time investigations. We've had human trafficking cases where victims have needed to be identified immediately, and we've had vulnerable victims where there's the potential for them to suffer highly significant or continued losses. And these SARs have enabled UK law enforcement to prevent losses to vulnerable victims within hours. Don't forget, there is plenty of useful UKFIU guidance available on the NCA website with further information. There's documents such as the guidance on reporting routes relating to vulnerable persons and the SAR glossary codes and reporting routes, for instance. And it's worth reiterating that the SARs regime is not a route to report a crime, and the guidance on the NCA website will signpost reporters as to the most appropriate reporting routes. So, until next time, I've been David Maguire, and this has been a UKFIU podcast.
UK Financial Intelligence Unit podcast.